Police K9 Radio. Rich, what's going on?
Just coming off a good seminar with K9s United. It was pretty excited to have those guys out. Did you have any good takeaways from that?
I had a lot of great takeaways. And this is the thing. When you guys go out to these conferences, understand you're not going to agree on everything. And we actually had disagreements in the way we did things.
Sure.
But the beauty of it is you go to these conferences with an open mind and what can I take from it, right? So when we got in there, I think I got one thing from each of the instructors that I'm actually going to apply. And again, we disagreed on some things, had great conversation, and it makes you dig deep to really like, okay, do I really understand the reason why I'm doing certain things? And so when you guys, again, go to any conference, go with an open mind. Don't concentrate on the things that you have differences on. Think of like, well, what can I take out of this to implement? And it was well worthwhile and a lot of good takeaways.
Yeah, there was a lot of good conversation that came after that. There was an agency that came that had some dogs that were a little weaker that needed some help. We've been helping work with some of those dogs, and I've been FaceTiming Jay and Nesbitt and letting them know, like, hey, this is what we're doing. They're giving some feedback. So guys like that, you know, are very passionate about helping other handlers out. Phone call away. We're kind of round table and stuff and getting a lot of good information.
Yeah, there's a lot of good conferences out there. Speaking of...
HITS is coming up.
Yep.
HITS 2023 in Phoenix, Arizona. It's a big one. There's going to be I think we have over 60 different classes with 35 instructors for only $375. So pretty good price for the return. It's a 4-day one. It's in Phoenix. Really nice resort down there, the Westin Kierland Resort in Phoenix, Arizona. And like you said last time, not too far away from driving up to Sedona or somewhere like that.
It's an easy talk-in for the wife. You know what I mean? Like you start talking Scottsdale, start talking resorts, you know, after the conference, you start talking Sedona. That's one of my favorite places.
Yeah,
Sedona.
Awesome.
There's a lot of vortexes up there. You ever been to a vortex?
No.
Okay. Well, there you go. Time to go to a vortex.
Time to go to a vortex.
Yeah. Change your life. Not really.
Sure it will.
I sat there and waited for something because they're like this, you know, the electromagnetic, you know, fields in this area. And I'm like, I don't feel anything.
Were you in a pink Jeep?
I did do the Pig Jeep tour. Full confession.
No, it's gonna be a good one. We've both been to HITS a few times. Always a lot of fun. Good, just like we were talking about with the K9s United guys. Good to go somewhere where you can see a lot of instructors. Pick and choose. It's like FTO. You know, you have 3 or 4 FTOs. You don't police for the rest of your career like your first FTO. You kind of take what you like from each one of those people, and as your career goes on, what you like from other instructors and other officers, and that's the kind of cop that you become.
Yep.
It's similar with something like this. You don't have to go to HITS and take everything as gospel. Take what you can use.
Yeah, get out of your little pond and jump into somebody else's pond, and that's how you grow.
Yeah.
Keep an open mind. Don't take things personal.
Pretty excited about that.
Awesome. All right, what else we got going on?
I've got a house full of dogs right now. I've got Malinois from 5 months up to about 14 months right now. The one thing, we have a new sponsor, which we're excited about. One thing that we really like, Inukshuk professional dog food. And one thing we really like about Inukshuk is we can get a dog in from pretty much anywhere in the world. We're getting them from Slovakia. We're getting them from Holland. We're getting them from Canada. We're getting them from Tennessee. We're getting them from all over the place. They're all coming with different diets. Some of them are raw. Some of them are kibble. We bring them all in. The day they arrive, we switch everybody over to Inukshuk, and we've seen nothing but success with that dog food. Inukshuk has several different blends. They have the 26-16, the 30-25, the 32-32, and for dogs that have any kind of allergies to chicken, any of that kind of stuff, they have the marines, which are all ocean-based proteins that are in those, and those are really good foods, and we're having a lot of success. I know the Grass Valley dog was struggling before it met up with Inukshuk.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the thing. We've been feeding Inukshuk for a while now. How long have you been feeding it?
Almost 2 years now.
Yeah, so this isn't like somebody came along and says, hey, I want to be a sponsor, and we're like, great, we'll put a bag of your dog food here. This is something that we've bought into a long time ago. We've tested it, it's tried, and it's been successful. I've got numerous circumstances or situations where dogs have, you know, I could give as far as testimonials. One specific is a little black Mal, quirky little dog, does circles in the car all day long. Handler couldn't keep weight on that dog, could see his ribs. He was trying different foods. It was going out both ends. Put him on a Inukshuk, and as a matter of fact, we trained this week, and he goes, hey, he's looking a little thick. Like he's actually got to take a couple pounds off of him. But we couldn't find a food that dog thrived on. And not every food is great for every dog, but we found a very high percentage that's good for a Inukshuk. So Can't recommend it enough.
Yeah, we just got off the phone with Kyle Schoberg, a agency around here in Sacramento, and he said that he switched his entire group of canines over to Inukshuk, and we've seen that with several agencies. So we're really proud to have Inukshuk as a sponsor, and it kind of goes with our theme tonight of cool stuff that's coming from Canada.
Cool stuff or cool people?
Cool stuff, cool
Both.
people, all those things.
Hey, and with us, so let's introduce our guest.
Let's do it. With us is Bob Eden.
Yeah.
Bob, welcome. We're really glad to have you on. If you've been in the police dog world for anything longer than about 5 minutes, you probably know who Bob Eden is. He's been around, he's done it, and he's got one of the oldest patrol canine books out there that I read back in the
I did
90s
too.
to learn how to do what we're doing.
Absolutely, kind of a pioneer in that way. And also, we're talking about the Police K9 conference. I went to your Police K9 conference back in, I think, 1999 in Sacramento, and it was like, you know what I mean? It was like
we were talking
all
about
great
I did the one
information.
that you did in Alameda. I think it was 2007, 8, somewhere around there. So we've both been to Bob Eden conferences. So
Yeah, so Bob, thank you for all that you've done for the industry and are continuing to do. That's the thing.
Good memories. Good memories.
Yeah, they're good times. Hey, Bob, can you tell us a little bit about yourself for those that don't know who you are, and what you've done and what you're doing?
I've been in the dog world probably about 40 years now. I started out my career when I was much, much younger and a lot better looking. And ran 2 patrol dogs for the Delta Police Department on the west coast of British Columbia. Wrote my first book in 1984, Dog Training for Law Enforcement. And it wasn't very long after that I decided that I really didn't want them to publish it anymore because my philosophies started to change very rapidly after I got the first book out. And so it was 10 years before I came out with another one, which was Canine Officer's Manual back in 94. And then most recently, the most recent book I did was Canine Supervisor's Manual, which came out last year. The conference was just something that I had a desire to do because at the time there were so many different types of things going on in the canine world. But it was very political. There was a lot of different, if you were into Schutzen, you had this style of training. If you went to certain police departments and you had this type of training, and some of it was very compulsive, some of it was very more neutral, and some of it was very positive. And what I wanted to do was to provide something that was beneficial, that was apolitical. In other words, we didn't follow any particular mandate as far as conferences such as USPCA or NAPWADA. Not that there's anything wrong there. It's just that I wanted to have something totally neutral, and that's kind of how it all began. And I know that people have talked about my conferences for many years, but in all fairness, all I was the person that kind of managed it and organized it and created it. But it was the people that I surrounded myself with that really made it what it became. I handpicked every single trainer that we carried along with us, and it was them that made it what it became.
Yeah, well, I mean that's a humble approach, and that's great, and I can appreciate that. But you brought that to the forefront, and there wasn't a lot of that going on then, right? And so, you got the information out to a lot of handlers that needed it, and I was definitely one of them at the time for sure. So. Who knows how many handlers you helped out there, so go home safe at night and
I appreciate it. We estimate between 3,500 and 4,000 handlers we put through the program over a period of 20 years.
That's awesome.
We were doing sometimes 2 or 3 conferences a year.
That's great.
That's great. And that led you, I'm guessing that's the kind of the path that ended up taking you towards cats and what you're doing now with being able to do some tracking information and getting the supervisoral stuff going.
Correct. I basically started cats in 1991 when computers were just starting to come into vogue. And so as a result of that, I wanted to try to do something that was a little bit easier, because back in those days, all we had was a scribbler and we drew lines in them and tried to pull all our information out and put it in these scribblers. And so I created a bit of a blueprint for cats. And it was initially based on a combination of information that I was learning from an association that I was with. I was in British Columbia, but I was a member of the Washington State Police K9s Association, and they taught an awful lot about preparation for court, what we called dog logs back in the day, as well as the paperwork that I had borrowed and learned from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. and started combining those two together, and that was the beginning of Cats. And from there, it just progressed. I started to share it with other handlers around me. Then realized that it needed upgrades, and by the time I remortgaged my house twice, it became a business. So it was just sort of something that wasn't intentional. It just kind of happened.
So how many agencies now across the nation do you have? How many are you working with, and what states do you represent?
I think we're in virtually every state that there is. I'll just do a quick look. I wasn't expecting that question. Right now, we've got a little over 2,000 agencies.
Wow, that's impressive.
It really is. And Bob, now, so for those handlers that are out there listening, because everybody maybe does this a little bit differently, uses different systems. Some of them are still writing down logs at the end of training. Why do we want to use Cats? What are you capturing, and what do you have to offer a handler that's out there currently working?
Well, Cats has been around a long time, and from personal experience and from getting input from the users in the system, we've developed a system that is very close to what your standard police RMS system is, but it's designed specifically around K9, obviously. And the thing that you can benefit from any electronic records management system, if it's built properly, you should be able to pull the stats that you need to protect yourself and your agency from liability. And it should also be able to give you the information that you need to support you when it comes to gaining convictions in court. And it needs to be a product that has been well looked at very carefully to make sure that it's not going to do anything that is going to cause you to create bad case law by what you are or how you are maintaining those stats. So it's important that all those things be taken into account. And so a good records management system will give you what you need to protect yourself from liability, as well as assist you in gaining convictions in court.
And I assume making it user-friendly also helps. Being a handler, working with handlers, sometimes handlers can lean away from being the most astute at getting all their records done, right? So the easiest way to get that information in there so that a handler's not, doing it at the end of the month or something like that also helps.
Absolutely. It's important that it be easy to use. The biggest thing that I see is a lot of these agencies will pick up the system, and I've had situations where I've had a lieutenant or a major even has called me and is quite concerned because they're trying to pull records out of the system in order to fulfill some FOI request, or even they've been demanded for a court case, and they're not getting what they need out of the system. And it's our system, and they think there's something wrong. And then we go into the system and we start looking a little bit more carefully. Number one, that's the first time they've actually looked into the system to see what they're getting out of it. And instead of doing it and maintaining it as their handlers are putting the information in, so they're getting kind of surprised when they get hit with a lawsuit or something that comes up. But what they're finding, or what we find, is that a lot of the handlers are only putting in the basic information. They're not putting in the information that they need to protect themselves. And so what's important is for these officers to recognize, particularly in K9, because it is almost inevitably at some point you're going to have a use of force with that dog. It's vitally important that you put that information in, just as vital as it is any police report. It's an area that you cannot be lazy in when it comes to maintaining your records.
Well, and I tell you, firsthand, I have used your system and wound up having to go to court on an incident. And when they always, like, first thing they do is, like, let's look at your training records, right? They're going to try to attack you, right? So failure to supervise, failure to train, a couple of the big ones. And so they come in there, well, let's see your training records. And the nice thing I really liked about Cats is I printed up this whole big thing. It has the training records, but then it had like bar graphs, had a pie chart, and you put it in this binder, and you're like, there you go. And it just looks so professional, much more so than if it's a bunch of like hand scribbling.
Check the box.
We misspelled words when we hand wrote it, right? You can't even read half of it because you wrote it in your car. There's some barbecue sauce on the corner of the sheet, all those things. It's like, yeah, that comes forward, not that professional, but what we were able to print up with your system was like, it made me look professional. So I was like, oh, well, yeah, this is it. I was all prideful, like I had something to do with all the charts and stuff, but it was super easy to use. So for you handlers out there that are handwriting it, I mean, this is this is definitely a way to just make your presentation much more professional, which is what they're going to look at, right? That's going to be when it goes into a jury or in a judge, when they look at things, like that's going to represent your work, and that's what you want it to look like.
Well, a lot of times you can just hand that over to the DA and the defense attorney, and it stops right there, right?
Exactly.
Like if it looks like you have your stuff together and it's well organized, and you hand it over, then it takes away a lot of the questions about your record keeping in general. It's pretty helpful to look
I've had that happen multiple times. That's bang on the money.
Yeah.
Hey, Bob, when you developed this thing, did you ever think we'd be trying to use it to show that our dogs aren't racist? Like, was that in your mind at all when you developed this software system?
Not in the least.
Okay.
Not in the least.
Because so currently, and we've discussed this in a previous podcast, we got AB 742 out there, and essentially it's saying the use of our dogs and our dogs are being called racist. And so the way we confront this is with facts. And that's one of the reasons we have Bob on here today, is to kind of go over the facts of exactly what's going on out there. And, you've got you're privy to 2,000 agencies. I mean, we're talking thousands of handlers. So we're talking a comprehensive database that I don't know exists anywhere else, because there's other software programs out there, and they are, to my knowledge, because we've talked to a few of them, they're not capturing the race element of it. So
no, and I think that's what actually brought us to having this conversation. Is I believe you posted on the LEO page what the facts were based on the information that you had, and from that information, Greg and I were like, "Whoa!" I don't think either one of us realized that you had such a comprehensive collection of data that spans the entire nation and that many agencies. So as we're out here in California dealing with this new assembly bill, it made sense for us to get you on as soon as possible and find out what it is that you are really seeing as far as deployments and what's really happening out there with canines.
Well, basically, when I first pulled the information out, we actually started it a long time ago, because I could sort of feel it coming. And we started seeing the odd court case where the officers were being accused of going after one demographic more than another. So we implemented it quite a while back in the CAT system. And when we started doing it, we started to realize the benefits of it really soon. One of the things that's nice about it is that it's very simple to capture in the system. It's like 2 check boxes and a drop-down box, and the algorithm that we have takes care of the rest. And it automatically separates any applications of a dog that are detection only out of the algorithms, so that all you're left with is any deployments of a dog that have got the potential where the dog might make contact with an individual. And so it purifies those stats, so we're getting the raw stats for what they really are. And what I did was, when I came up with my Canine Supervisor's Manual book here last year, I wanted to pull those stats, because we'd started to see newspaper articles where there was a lot of accusations, particularly by Black Lives Matter movement and so on and so forth, where they were accusing police of using dogs on them more than anybody else. And it's patently false. And that is borne out by the stats when we started pulling the stats out. So I put the actual stats in the book, in a table in the book, so that anybody that has got access, you can even get it without even purchasing the book. If you look at Google, if you Google the Google version of the book, they've got a free preview of it, and it shows the preview with that table happens to be in that preview. You can actually look at the stats there from actual police stats that are being input into the system, and the stats show something quite different than what the media would have you believe.
Bob, were you surprised by any of the stats when you put this all together and you started collecting information? Was there, some of the information that you gathered that you were like, wow, this is even a little surprising to me, or were they right along with what you thought they would be?
They weren't along with what I thought they would be, not by any stretch of the imagination. I thought that there would be some factual foundation to what the media was doing. In other words, I thought they might be at least somewhat close.
You would think, right? Like,
yeah, you would think so. But it was nowhere near what the accusations were. And when we started looking at the actual stats, I was surprised at where the black demographic came in, because it was significantly lower than the white and the Hispanic. And as a matter of fact, the Hispanic demographic was more than the white demographic. There were more Hispanic contacts by dogs than there were white, and there were way more white contacts than there were either Hispanic than there were black. But when it comes right down to it, the black demographic that we pulled was significantly lower than both the white and the Hispanic demographic, significantly lower.
Can you just go ahead and touch on that? I'm guessing you have a computer in front of you that you can kind of look at those stats and kind of tell us what's happening nationwide and specifically in California.
So basically, I pulled the stats out specifically. It got my dander up when this bill came out. I felt, I'm a Canadian, I'm not involved, but I need to do something, because really, I don't know if there's any other systems out there that collect this type of information. And if they do, I don't know if they're going to do anything to rebut what's being put in this bill. I've got the information, I should be doing something about it. That's how I felt at the time. So we pulled out the bite ratios nationwide to give you an idea here. The bite ratio for the black demographic is 3.5%, basically. So it's quite different than what you would have them when they're saying that, for example, in California, even they're saying that there's twice as many black people that are bitten by police dogs as there are white people. That's just not correct. There's a 3.5 people basically out of 100 that are black are bitten by police dogs. Hispanics is 9.6%.
Well, and Bob, going back to that 3.5 number, so what is that? What is the basis for that? So these are deployments in which a dog could have had engagement. The dog was out, and it was in a position that the handler could have deployed the dog for a bite. However,
that's correct.
There was a de-escalation. Imagine that, a de-escalation of sorts, in which 97% of the time the dog de-escalated that situation where the dog actually didn't need to be used and the person surrendered.
That's correct. I've got it up on the CAT's website, as a matter of fact, in that article. I've got a bite ratio of 3.5%, whereas 96.5% of police dog deployments on black suspects, where there's a potential for the dog to physically apprehend the suspect, the arrest resulted in no physical contact of the suspect by the dog once the dog located him. 96.5% of the time. Hispanic, their bite ratio, as I mentioned, was 9.6%. So 90.6% of the time, Hispanic suspects where the dog could have potentially bitten, the situation gets de-escalated. 90.6% of the time they are not bitten. And in the white category comes in at 7.6% bite ratio. So 92.4% of white people are not bitten when the opportunity is there where the dog could possibly potentially have a bite. And everybody else kind of falls in. All of their demographics, they're so few in numbers comparatively speaking, that we combine them all together. And all the other demographics, the bite ratio came in at 3.9% with all the other demographics combined. And that's basically how we set it up. So basically, what has been put in AB 742, the information in there is patently false. It's even patently false when you look at the Department of Justice, the California Department of Justice stats. They've twisted that somehow because they're not even following what the stats say in that Department of Justice report.
And I want to iterate something that Greg said earlier. All three of us have been handlers at some point. I don't recall ever taking my dog out to deploy on any situation where there wasn't a crime committed, right? We're reactionary. The K9 is a reactionary tool to some crime that has been committed. There's not a way that I can think of that would be anyway legal to pull a dog out and just start targeting people based on race. There has to be a call of a crime that I'm responding to, or me on viewing a crime that's happening out there. Then now my dog has to, or I have to respond to that crime and choose whether to use the dog or not. There's, like I said, it's pretty difficult to picture a way that I can show up to a robbery, decide that I want those robbery suspects to look a certain way, and then respond to that. I'm just going to a robbery.
Yeah, here's the thing. Most of the people that are listening to this podcast are in law enforcement, so we already understand that we have a policy that's like that thick at the police department that we have to abide by. And if you look at the K9 policy, I mean, it's several pages. I mean, 20, 30 pages, depending on what agency you're working at. So there's a lot of guidelines. There's a lot of and they're more than guidelines, they're mandates of you shall do this, you shall do that, and you're either within policy or you're not. So, the severity of the crime, we're deploying only on serious crimes. Is a person actively resisting? Is a person a threat to the officers or the community? All these things are looked at prior to us pulling our dog out of the car. We are not deploying on simple, minor property crimes. And so, there, if you're listening to this and you have no concept of when we use the dog, it's spelled out for every agency, and it's reinforced through case law and policy. So, like you're talking about, Rich, like we respond to the crime, and then now we're going to use the dog once usually the crime has been committed, or while the crime is being committed, or after the crime has been committed. So, to say that race has any part of that would be a fabrication. So, and I hate talking about race. Like, this is not usually a conversation we're going to have, but it's been thrust upon us. Talking about, how many black Americans have been bit, versus white Americans and this and that. Like, it's not even a thought when we're out there working our dogs, and yet now we've been forced to have this conversation.
No, and I think fortunately this is where Bob comes in with cats, and I think before all of this in our mind, we knew what we were doing was right and just, and we were, deploying the dogs appropriately, and there wasn't a situation of race or gender or anything that involved in the dog's usage. And now Bob comes along and he actually has the stats to back that up and show what's really happening out there, and what dogs are responding to, and how we're using them, and whether we're using them appropriately or not.
The other thing, gentlemen, is that it's not just about the stats. Number one, the stats don't lie. Facts are the facts. It's, do you want to listen to the reality of it? And if you're going to apply this to any kind of a bill, there's ways that you can improve canine policing. There's many ways that you can improve it. But by just abolishing the ability to use a dog that is frequently is going to save a life as opposed to going to lethal force is not the right way to do it based on emotion. And to me, they're not being, it's just not justifiable in any way, shape, or form, and it lacks any common sense. For example, facts aside, two other things that you've got to look at is a lot of times we'll go to calls where we don't know what the race of the individual is. Give you an example. You do a situation where you have an alarm call and you respond to an alarm, and you end up deploying the dog on a track because you get to the alarm and sure enough it's an active burglary that's taken place. You've got no idea what race the individual is that's inside the building, or if they fled from the building and now you're tracking them down, you don't necessarily know what race they are. So that's right there on its face. Calls like that are all race neutral. You don't know who you're dealing with when you come to the end of that track, unless you're able to see and discern that before the dog makes contact. You really don't have any clue what race that individual is. Secondly, another aspect of this is I have some very good friends that are Hispanic and black and Asian that run dogs, that are canine handlers. This doesn't ever seem to be taken into account. It just seems to be all, race-based without consideration of what's the race of the officer that is actually deploying the dog. And if it's black on black or Hispanic on Hispanic, how does that come into play as far as the race situation is concerned? Common sense just says that this bill just doesn't have any common sense to it whatsoever.
No, and shout out to another podcast that's out there. Robert Cabral had a podcast recently where he had Michael Gooseby on, recently retired supervisor from Los Angeles Police Department K9 unit, also a black American who was in that position, and talked at length about the situation where he was policing in LA. Good podcast to listen to, talks about some of those same situations.
Exactly. Another example is the San Diego experience that they had, and I've put that in the book as well. At one point, they were up to about 40 or 50 dog teams, and through the Obama era, they ended up having to reduce the number of dogs that they had on the street. And I'm just trying to go to some notes here that took over a 23-year period. They had a number of officers killed, but they only had 3 officers killed in a 20-year period when they had the high number of dogs in. Then as they started to decrease and decline in the numbers because of the cutbacks and so on and so forth, they got reduced down to 20 teams, and they ended up having those 3 officers killed just within a span of about 3 years. So, or sorry, in 6 years. So there's a definite correlation in the use of dogs as de-escalation tools, and the amount of force that's used by these dogs is nowhere near what it's going to be if that tool is taken away and they have to resort to gunfire.
Greg and I talk about that all the time, and personally, it hit me. I retired from law enforcement within the last year and a half, and we lost the carotid out here. You know, it's a I don't know if you have the carotid in Canada.
Carotid control, yes.
Yeah, carotid control. So we lost that in California. It was a knee-jerk reaction to something that happened in New York. Didn't have anything to do with California, but California decided somebody died in New York due to a use of force, and they were going to say, out here, no longer the carotid is available. I was in a situation where I was fighting for my life with the gentleman. I used the carotid. It worked out effectively. He ended up going to jail in good health. I ended up going home in good health. Me being able to use the carotid that night saved his life, because the next step would probably be me shooting him. As we lose all of these tools, if they go away, as dogs go away, the carotid goes away, and we're left with either talking somebody down or shooting them, it seems like the outcome of something like that is much more egregious than getting bit by a dog or having a carotid applied to you.
Absolutely.
Sure. I mean, we've been talking about de-escalation and, you know, 835A, and that's been the big push is de-escalation, and then to take the tools that actually help us de-escalate away and then expect officers to continue to de-escalate. Obviously, that doesn't make sense. But, you know, a lot of this, like you said, Bob, like most of this bill doesn't make any sense. So, Bob, can you talk about the actual numbers? Because you went through the percentages, but can you talk about the numbers you're looking at nationwide? And I think the numbers, the percentages that you gave, the ratios, correct me if I'm wrong, they were from 2017 to like 2 weeks ago.
Correct.
Okay, so like
yes.
a 5-year period. And what were the actual numbers behind those percentages, if you have those?
So during that period of time, black canine arrests, the numbers there were 10,528 black arrests that we pulled out of the system. Out of those 10,528, there were 372 that resulted in a dog bite. So there's quite a significant, you know, small number there. It's not what the media would have you believe or what the writers of AB 742 would have you believe. Hispanic arrests during that period of time. Now keep in mind that these are the straight arrests. There were half the numbers, but there were more percentages as far as bites. So there are 5,331 Hispanic arrests by the dogs, and out of those 5,331, 513 were bitten. On the white arrests, out of white canine arrests, there was 11,527 canine arrests, with a total of 876 suspects that were white bitten by the police dogs. For all other demographics combined, there were 3,172 arrests by police dogs in that period of time, and all other demographics, and only 124 of those were bitten, for a bite ratio of that 3.9%.
It's pretty telling.
Well,
so just to give you a total, there were, out of our system at that time, we had a total of 30,558 police dog arrests during that period of time, with a total number of bites being at 1,885. So the national bite ratio, all demographics combined, is only 6.2%. And that's an average of all races combined. So when you look at, for example, the black bite ratio, when it comes right down to it, is almost half of that.
Yeah. And again, I want to reiterate this because it's important. We're not talking about like petty theft suspects, right? We're not talking about financial crime suspects. We're not talking about, you know, traffic violations. We're talking about if the dog is involved in an arrest, it is a serious offense. You know, they've checked all these boxes. It's been a serious offense. There's been typically some type of evading, some type of resisting. They are a threat to officers. That's why we're getting the dog out of the car. And then when confronted by the dog, now we get a surrender, and that's when we de-escalate. So, I mean, I think these stats are incredible. I mean, you're talking, how many, what's the total again? 30,000 arrests?
30,558 canine arrests.
Yeah, and then 6% of those resulted in a bite. And here's the other reality is they try to make it sound like it's a serious injury or death is what the creators of this AB 742 is. But we all know the vast majority of those, it's a puncture. it's bruising. It might be some scrapes.
Well, I think there's a little trickery going on there because they're basing that on who's getting transported to the hospital. But most policies,
everybody does.
I would assume all policies at this point, if you get bit by the dog, it's a requirement that you take them to the hospital to get checked on to make sure they're okay.
There's another thing. Sorry, Rich. There's another thing that comes into play there too with the DOJ statistics. The California Department of Justice statistics, there were only 660 incidents reported to them. And that report is based on serious injury or death. They put the two together in the same report. But there's no statistics in the report that separate canine out of firearms-related situations. Okay, they put it all together. So the writers of AB 742 put the two of them together and state in there they cause serious bodily injury or death. They also include things like blindness and so on and so forth, but there's no specifics anywhere that backs up that information. And the fact is, there wasn't a single death by an active police dog deployment in the state of California during that period of time. And in fact, to the best of my knowledge, there have only been 3 active deployment police dog deaths in the history of police canines, in the entire history of police canines in North America. And that's many decades of police dog use.
Well, and this we joke about this because it's like the stats on COVID. Did you die with COVID, or did you die and you had been bitten by a police dog, but is the police dog a direct result of your death, right? And so I think some of the stuff that they're bringing up is the person later died, but they had been bitten at one time, so now they're correlating that as like a canine death, right? Even though it had nothing to do with it. The fact that maybe excited delirium, they had a bunch of drugs on board, they were involved in a collision, or there was several uses of force. You know, the person had a gun and the guy was bit, but then he was also shot and he died from the gunshot wounds, but they're including all of that together. And so there's a lot of trickery that's going on with this thing. And so that's why I'm glad, Bob, you're on giving us the hard facts.
Hey, Bob, since you got all these stats put together and you've put them out there in a pretty public manner, has any credible news organization reached out to you to discuss the truth?
One, and that was Fox News out of Sacramento. I did an interview with them, and they didn't use any of the stats and information that I provided them. They did a short little clip of me basically stating that the dogs are beneficial when it comes to de-escalation, and dogs that are situations that might otherwise result in a death by gunfire would be alleviated by the use of the police dogs, and that was it. They never used any of the information. I have taken it upon myself, and I realize I'm Canadian, and so I may not be that much in the game as far as California is concerned, as far as they're concerned. However, I've written to I've sent an email to virtually every assembly person for the state of California and have not received any acknowledgement, with the exception of one that just wrote me back and said, thanks for the information. Other than that, I've received no acknowledgement from anybody down there trying to spread the information out down there.
Bob, can you, again, let everybody know, and hopefully somebody that runs across the media or a PIO for an agency is watching this and is able to get this information, because other agencies in California are going to need to share this information. It needs to be out there. How can people get a hold of you if somebody now wants to find the truth?
There's 2 websites that I've actually got this up, well written out with all the links and everything that they can look on it for themselves. On the Police Dog homepage, there is a link there for AB 742. And on the Cats Platinum homepage, there's also a link on there for, or they can reach me directly. They can contact me and send me an email if they like, or contact me directly through my business line. My email, I'm sure you'll probably have it. I don't know if you put it up afterwards or not, but I'm open to having anybody contact me if they want to know what the facts are.
Yeah, and for you handlers out there that are listening to this, this is a conversation that you need to be running up the chain, because I guarantee it, all the agencies that we deal with, I've already reached out to some of them, and I was a little proactive on it, and they were like, oh, I'm glad you reached out, because I have to give a presentation to either our city council, county council, captain, chief, whoever it is. You know, they're wanting to know, because now it's been brought to the forefront. Like, where do we as an agency like rank in this? So this information that Bob's putting out, I mean, it's gold. So let's get the facts out there. Bob, what I'm going to do is we're going to put these links on the screen. So if you guys are listening to this on YouTube, the links are going to be on there. And then if you're listening to it on our podcast, we'll put it in the show notes below.
Absolutely. Anything you need.
Awesome, Bob. We really appreciate your time and your expertise and the amount of time that you put into the CATS program and actually taking the time and effort to go into your own program and pull this information out so we can all learn from it.
It's a pleasure. One thing that I want to add on to here, for those of you in California that are on the system, if you haven't run into it yet, at some point in time, you're likely going to get a letter from the ACLU, one of your favorite organizations, I'm sure. And they will demand certain information. They've got a letter that they shotgun out to 300-400 agencies at a time. And those of you that are in the system will have a report built into the system, and all you've got to do is push the button on that particular report. It'll give you those stats in just one button push, and your FOI request is completed. So be aware of that for those of you that are currently using the CAT system.
Which stats are they looking for, Bob?
They want these demographics actually that we're pulling out right now that has become this argument, and they want it by district. They want it by the number of the bites, the race of the individual, what district within your city that these bites are happening in, and the number of deployments and so on and so forth. And what the system does is it pulls out that information and it only gives them the actual statistical information with nothing else. It's a nice clean sheet that you hand off, and it's done in about 30 seconds. We did that after we got a call actually from a client in California that said that they were coming on board with us because they needed something else. They were using something else at the time, and it took him, one of his secretaries, and a dog handler 2.5 weeks to pull the information out for a single FOI request by ACLU.
All right, Bob. Hey, man, again, I appreciate everything you've done for the industry over the years. You're still involved in it. And then, for our listeners out there, if you're still handwriting this stuff or you're using a system that's not capturing this data, I mean, it's inescapable. Like, it's been brought to us. Like, we're from now on, I mean, I think, it's an imperative that you're capturing all of the, the race data and everything else, because we're going to be talking about this for a long time. It's not going away.
I think the big thing is if you picture yourself on the stand and you pull out your binder full of check marks and scribbles, versus pulling out a binder that has, bar graphs and typed out information with good notes, and, you're able to show one or the other while you're sitting up there on the stand. I think it's every cop's least favorite thing to be embarrassed in the courtroom.
100%.
This is one way to avoid that.
We've all been embarrassed.
Yes, sir.
That's how we learn.
Right.
Thank you, Bob. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, gentlemen. Very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Until next time,
Train hard.
be safe.